1,000 Miles Up the Nile, Section 49. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 1,000 Miles Up the Nile by Amelia B. Edwards. Chapter 17. The Second Cataract, Part 1. A fresh breeze, a full sail, and the consciousness of a holiday well earned carried us gaily along from Abu Simbel to Wadi Halfa. We started late in the afternoon of the first day, made about 12 miles before the wind dropped, and achieved the remaining 28 miles before noon the next day. It was our last trip on the Nile under canvas. At Wadi Halfa the Philae was doomed to be dismantled. The big sail that had so long been our pride and delight would there be taken down, and our good boat, her grace and swiftness gone at one fell swoop, would become a mere lumbering barge, more suggestive of civic outings on the Thames than of Cleopatra's galley. For some way beyond Abu Simbel the western bank is fringed by a long line of volcanic mountains, as much alike in height, size, and shape as a row of Martello towers. They are divided from one another by a series of perfectly uniform sand drifts, while on the rounded top of each mountain, thick as the currants on the top of a certain cake known to schoolboys by the endearing name of black caps, lies a layer of the oddest black stones in the world. Having more than once been to the top of the rock of Abshek, which is the first large mountain of the chain, and strewn in the same way, we recognized the stones, and knew what they were like. In color they are purplish black, tinged here and there with dull red. They ring like clinkstone when struck, and in shape are most fantastic. L. picked up some like petrified bunches of grapes. Others are twisted and writhen like the Vesuvian lava of 1871. They lie loose upon the surface, and are of all sizes, some being as small as currants, and others as large as quartern loaves. Speaking as one having no kind of authority, I should say that these stones are unquestionably of fiery parentage. One seems to see how, boiling and bubbling in a state of fusion, they must have been suddenly checked by contact with some cooler medium. Where the chain ends, about 3 or 4 miles above Abu Simbel, the view widens, and a host of outlying mountains are seen scattered over an immense plain reaching for miles into the western desert. On the eastern bank, Kalat Ada, a huge, rambling Roman citadel going to solitary ruin on the last water-washed precipice to the left, brings the opposite range to a like end, and abuts on a similar plain, also scattered over with detached peaks. The scene here is desolately magnificent. A large island covered with palms divides the Nile in 2 branches, each of which looks as wide as the whole river. An unbounded distance opens away to the silvery horizon. On the banks there is no verdure, neither is there any sign of human toil. Nothing lives, nothing moves, save the wind and the river. Of all the strange peaks we have yet seen, the mountains hereabout are the strangest. Alone or in groups, they start up here and there from the deserts on both sides, like the pieces on a chessboard. They are, for the most part, conical, but they are not extinct craters, such as are the volcanic cones of Korosko and Dacca. Seeing how they all rose to about the same height, and were alike capped with that mysterious couche of shining black stones, the writer could not help fancying that, like the isolated Rochers de Cornuaille and Rochers de Saint Michel at Puy, they might be but fragments of a rocky crust, rent and swept away at some indefinitely remote period of the world's history, and that the level of their present summits might represent perhaps the ancient level of the plain. As regards form, they are weird enough for the wildest geological theories. All taper more or less towards the top. One is 4-sided like a pyramid, another, in shape like a truncated cone, looks as if crowned with a pagoda summer-house. A third seems to be surrounded by a mosque and cupola, a fourth is scooped out in tiers of arches, a fifth is crowned apparently with a cairn of piled stones, and so on with variations as endless as they are fantastic. A geologist might perhaps account for these caprices by showing how fire and earthquake and deluge had here succeeded each other, and how, after being first covered with volcanic stones and then split into chasms, the valleys thus opened had by and by been traversed by torrents, which wore away the softer parts of the rock and left the harder standing. Some way beyond Kalat Adda, when the Abu Simbel Range and the Palm Island have all but vanished in the distance, and the lonely peak called the Mountain of the Sun, Gebel esh Shems, has been left far behind, we come upon a new wonder, namely, upon two groups of scattered tumuli, one on the eastern, one on the western bank. Not volcanic forms these, not even accidental forms, if one may venture to form an opinion from so far off. They are of various size, some little, some big, all perfectly round and smooth, and covered with a rich greenish-brown alluvial soil. How did they come here? Who made them? What did they contain? The Roman ruin close by, the 240,000 deserters who must have passed this way, the Egyptian and Ethiopian armies that certainly poured their thousands along these very banks, and might have fought many a battle on this open plain, suggest all kinds of possibilities, and fill one's head with visions of buried arms, and jewels, and cinerary urns. We are more than half minded to stop the boat and land that very moment, but are content on second thoughts with promising ourselves that we will at least excavate one of the smaller hillocks on our way back. And now, the breeze freshening and the dahabeah tearing gallantly along, we leave the tumuli behind and enter upon a still more desolate region, where the mountains recede farther than ever and the course of the river is interrupted by perpetual sandbanks. On one of these sandbanks, just a few yards above the edge of the water, lay a log of driftwood, apparently a battered old palm trunk, with some remnants of broken branches yet clinging to it, such an object, in short, as my American friends would very properly call a snag. Our pilot leaned forward on the tiller, put his finger to his lip, and whispered, "Crocodilo." The painter, the idle man, the writer, were all on deck, and not one believed him. They had seen too many of these snags already, and were not going to let themselves again be excited about nothing. The pilot pointed to the cabin where L. and the little lady were indulging in that minor vice called afternoon tea. "Sitte," said he, "call sitte, crocodilo." We examined the object through our glasses. We laughed the pilot to scorn. It was the worst imitation of a crocodile that we had yet seen. All at once the palm trunk lifted up its head, cocked its tail, found its legs, set off running, wriggling, undulating down the slope with incredible rapidity, and was gone before we could utter an exclamation. We three had a bad time when the other two came up and found that we had seen our first crocodile without them. A sandbank which we passed next morning was scored all over with fresh trails, and looked as if it had been the scene of a crocodile parliament. There must have been at least 20 or 30 members present at the sitting, and the freshness of the marks showed that they had only just dispersed. A keen and cutting wind carried us along the last 30 miles of our journey. We had supposed that the farther south we penetrated, the hotter we should find the climate. Yet now, strange to say, we were shivering in sealskins, under the most brilliant sky in the world, and in a latitude more southerly than that of Mecca or Calcutta. It was some compensation, however, to run at full speed past the dullest of Nile scenery, seeing only sandbanks in the river, sand hills and sand flats on either hand, a disused shadoof or a skeleton boat rotting at the water's edge, a wind-tormented dome palm struggling for existence on the brink of the bank. End of section 49.